What do you say to people that still dispute like that Poochie was Biggie's killer? Like what's the people that still feel like it's still thin? And you know, the problem is that Russell Poole's theory relied on, at the time, seemed like a lot of good evidence, but then it turned out all these jailhouse informants, you know, recanted and admitted they were lying. And when you really look at what's left, there's really not anything tangible left. But it's still, a lot of people are still kind of stuck in that mode and kind of stuck on that theory. And then they look at Poochie and like, well, all you have is, you know, Teresa Swann. What?
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that, you know, circumstantially, you can make a case like, hey, this is really suspicious. Some of the things that Russell was looking into were, you know, they needed to be looked into. Unfortunately, you know, all of it was explained away, and very easily. And so that's the problem, is like these circumstantial things that appear to all paint a picture, when you look close enough and you really dissect it, it all dissipates away into nothing. Right. But it was, you know, you have to still go down those rabbit holes. And so that is, you know, it's fine. And people get stuck in their rabbit hole.
Right.
And maybe they have their own personal animosities against the police, so they want to believe that story because, you know, they already don't trust cops, whatever it is. So people can get stuck into just subjective truths.
Right.
And that becomes true to them. But when you do the work and you do the hard work, the objective work, then you realize that none of this has any validity. And so then, you know, the only other plausible explanation is the one that we came up with, which isn't built on circumstantial evidence or circumstantial events. It's not even evidence, it's just circumstantial information. For us, testimonial evidence is one of the strongest types of evidence you can get. That's why you have witnesses take a witness stand and you rely on testimony provided. And that's what we had. We had, you know, and it was very compelling eyewitness testimony because it's a person who's incriminating themselves and they are compelled to tell the truth, or there were consequences to lying. Mm-hmm. So these type of things elevate that type of evidence versus some circumstantial information that's been disproven. So that's the only real plausible theory that exists. The Russell Poole stuff, if you're objective about it, it dissipates into thin air. So I believe Teresa Swann was telling the truth. It makes perfect sense to me because we know the type of person Poochie was, very much like a George Williams. He's down for the cause. For him to do that would have been right up his alley. You know, he'd done that type of stuff before.
Right.
And so it makes a lot of sense. What does become a little bit of a question is the whole perception of it being a Muslim. And so we know that a lot of the information that people were sharing was being tainted information. They're adopting somebody else's impression of something.
Right.
You know, I saw a Muslim, it was weird, it's suspicious, we've already had problems with them the previous night and before, and that becomes part of your processing, is that, well, they're the most likely suspects because we have a problem with them.
Right.
Right? So you have to be cautious about that. But it's natural for them to also, to adopt that into their perception. So with the whole Nation of Islam thing, if you really truly look close at like what G Money Young said, he's like, I didn't see shit. Maybe he had a tan suit on, maybe it was gray, maybe it was whatever. But I just know I saw it down the barrel of the gun.
Right.
And, maybe I sasaw this,
part of the face, yeah.
It's so vague. And same with Little C's. It's like, man, it was just a quick glimpse. And then, of course, you show either of them the composites, and they're like, no, this doesn't look like them, or this doesn't look like the person who you guys might suggest it was, which would be Amir. And so the idea that you've got to really dissect all of this information and look at it objectively, and when I do that, I feel like Poochie is the most likely candidate. Now, is it possible that Poochie was working in conjunction with somebody else? Absolutely. And I would never reject that possibility. There could have been somebody else there. We just know that Teresa Swann met with Poochie. A deal was made that Poochie would carry out the hit, and that there was a transfer of money on more than one occasion. So there was a hit for hire. It's right up Poochie's alley. He's the guy that Suge would likely turn to. And, you know, and then a shooting happens. And whether he was the actual shooter or he was just involved in getting it done, we know he collects money afterwards and he disappears and he leaves town. So these type of things kind of open the idea that, okay, yeah, could Poochie have subcontracted it out to somebody else? Or we also know that it was not completely unusual, and this is actually very common, when gang members are going to go do something like this, they intentionally create a visual deception.
Right.
You know, or an audible, you know, Crips would do a drive-by shooting and yell out the name of a blood gang, so that when the cops got there and they interviewed witnesses, the witness would say, yeah, the guys that drove by were yelling, you know, Pyru or whatever.
Right. So that must be who you should look at.
Yeah. And we also knew that there were home invasions going on with blood gang members in the city of LA, where guys were going and portraying themselves as Fruit of Islam.
Right, going door to door to sell stuff, and then they'd get access to the house.
Wearing the full FOI garb.
Right.
You know, the suits and the bow ties. So some thinking goes into it.
Right.
It's not fly by the seat of your pants, you know, grab a gun and go. So some thought goes into this, and I think that guys like Poochie would have put thought into it. He probably would have known that there was an FOI present because it was already happening at other venues.
Right.
The Soul Train Awards, the hotels. So he would have been smart enough and perceptive enough to go, that's how I can infiltrate, that's how I can fit in, that's how I can not bring attention to myself, is to, and then when the cops get there and people ask who did it, oh, some guy in a suit and a bow tie.
And they'll be like, oh, we got to go look at the Nation of Islam. It must be behind this.
So all things considered, for me, like, it makes the most sense. There's really no competing alternative theory that's opposing it or undermining it. It hasn't been disproven. And so for me, that's the conclusion I'm drawing at this point, is that she was telling the truth. And it all makes sense.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that it's never been officially solved is because that circle, that conspiracy circle, was so small that it likely only involved 3 people.
And there is a record, people ask about this, there is a record of Swann visiting Suge in jail and in prison. And a lot, like was visiting him a lot.
There are the records for county jail, which is where she claims these conversations took place prior to Biggie's shooting, is that she'd visited him under the auspices of being a legal aid, where she could have non-monitored visits and have the conversations with Suge without anybody eavesdropping on him. Yeah, but again, getting in there and having those conversations and understanding that for Teresa Swann, this testimony, these incriminating statements of herself are on the back of her knowing that if you don't tell the truth, there's going to be consequences that don't only affect you, they affect your kids. Mm-hmm. And I think for those of us that have kids, would weigh very heavily on doing the things that we have to do to protect our kids. And if that means telling the truth and getting somebody else in trouble, then that's typically the course you would take.